It's an opportunity to have your voice heard and to really educate those who are making the decisions on legislation.
The Weekly Friedman, your source for the most essential information in the default industry, with your host, Adam Friedman.
I'm joined today by Friedman Vartolo partner Zachary Gold. Zach recently went to DC to meet with federal senators and assembly members and took a similar trip to Albany a few months back. As a result, he has a unique perspective at the state and federal level on where mortgage servicing and borrower protections may be headed. Zach, thanks for joining me today.
Great to be here.
So recently you were in DC and you met with some federal senators, assemblymen and women in connection with some industry conferences. Why do you go there? Is this for a nice photo op? Why does this matter?
I think it's very important to hear from the stakeholders and interested parties about the impacts of some of, in this case, pending legislation and how it will really impact the industry. It's an opportunity to have your voice heard and to really educate those who are making the decisions on legislation.
Do you feel like when you give this feedback to the stakeholders, it's making a difference, or are they just kind of humoring you and hearing what you have to say?
I think there's a bit of a misconception about advocacy in general. So it's not as though we are sitting in some smoke-filled room and I'm trying to convince a lawmaker to let me get away with something. That's not how the process works. It's really collaboration. And the word that I used earlier is education. So we're really there as almost like the expert witnesses, trying to really inform those who are making the decisions about the second order effects of some of their proposed legislation.
Working at a firm like ours with clients who are on one side of the table, you're both a semi-interested or an interested party in the legislation, but you're also an expert who understands or has a unique perspective and an ability to understand how proposed legislation may impact not just your client, but also the industry. I think the expectation is you're almost lobbying. Regardless of your opinions on proposed legislation, who better to educate than the experts that are working in these fields every day? And it's going to be pretty rare to find an expert who also isn't actively involved in the industry that will be impacted.
My background is as an attorney, so I was able to offer a perspective. I was one of the few lawyers there. I was able to offer a legal perspective and discuss some of the dynamics and impacts through the judicial process of some of the legislation. There were other stakeholders that were there from origination, from servicing, and we all had an opportunity to provide unique insight to the impacts of the legislation on our respective practices and areas of expertise. The best example is one of the subjects that we were there discussing, which was the 21st Century Road to Housing. And that's bipartisan legislation that is designed essentially to try to increase the housing market in the United States. As a representative in the mortgage industry, we're really pulling in the same direction. We want those things as well. We want legislation that improves housing. So this isn't a pro-legislation versus anti-legislation dynamic. This is us discussing what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, what could improve the goal of increasing housing, and what may actually impact and cause a reduction in housing unintentional. There was a clause in the legislation that there was a typo, and it actually was going to result in a reduction in the FHA loan limits that have not been updated since 2003. Just a clerical error. So we were there saying, just so you know, there's a typo in legislation. The limits actually are decreasing. And with inflation, of course, you want the limits to increase, the loan limits for FHA.
Is there anything major that you could see coming down the pipe by way of legislation that would have a really big impact on the industry that you could share?
There was actually a lot of buzz around AI, even at the state level. I think both at the federal and state level, they're really trying to get a handle on the potential impacts and consumer protection issues associated with that. I think we as an industry would like to see federal legislation because it's a waste of resources. If as an industry, we have to tailor everything to very specific states, we really want to see a federal standard be implemented. There was some discussion about privatizing or taking Fannie Mae Freddie out of conservatorship. The sense is that nothing's happening immediately and that all the stakeholders involved understand that this is not something that can just be done overnight and it has to be done carefully because of the potential impact on the mortgage-backed security industry of just immediately reprivatizing Fannie Mae and Freddie.
This is some interesting stuff. I think you've done a great job here shedding some light on how policymaking works in general.
Adam, thank you for your time.
Thanks for joining Zachary Goldeneye and the Weekly Friedman, your source to the most essential information in the default industry. Thanks for tuning in and looking forward to seeing you next time.